U.S. President Donald Trump is reportedly pushing for a summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un before the end of the year, with a possible meeting on the sidelines of the APEC summit in China this November. South Korea and the United States will wrap up their annual ROK-U Freedom Shield exercise on Friday, nearly a week earlier than planned, following U.S. President Donald Trump's directive to scale back the drills, with some joint field training also set to be reduced. And China's top diplomat Wang Yi is here in Seoul for the first time in 5 years, raising hopes that Beijing could help bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. We begin with a growing speculation over a possible Trump-Kim summit. U.S. President Donald Trump is reportedly seeking a face-to-face meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un before the year is out, with November's APEC summit in China emerging as a possible venue. Our Kim Do-yeon searches us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered a cutback of joint military drills with South Korea, aiming to open a diplomatic channel with Pyongyang. The Wall Street Journal reports Trump wants to meet Kim Jong-un during his trip to China for the APEC summit this November. Despite Washington's overtures, the Kim Jong-un regime has remained mostly silent, using state media instead to continue to denounce the ongoing ROK-U.S. joint military exercise, ROK-U Freedom Shield. South Korea's unification ministry assesses direct engagement remains viable.
Kim Jong-un stated that if Washington drops its hostile policy, there is no reason they cannot get along. With President Trump scaling back exercises, recognizing the regime as a negotiating partner could lead to resumed dialogue.
Analysts warn reviving talks will prove far tougher than during Trump's first term. The Kim Jong-un regime has since codified its nuclear status into law.
Pyongyang now approaches talks as a declared nuclear state, demanding concessions far beyond past symbolic freezes.
Deepening ties with Moscow and Beijing offer the regime short-term relief, but fall short of replacing global markets. Comprehensive international sanctions remain the primary pressure point capable of pulling Pyongyang back to the table.
More importantly, to attract actual investment, which requires sanctions against the regime to be eased, U.S. North Korea relations must improve.
Analysts see Trump's push as a bid for a quick diplomatic victory amid prolonged tensions in Iran, with the midterm elections coming up in November. Also something Pyongyang would consider in terms of Trump's intentions. Seoul, however, hopes the move can break a years-long deadlock.
We hope this development leads to meaningful U.S.-North Korea dialogue and expands into broader improvements in inter-Korean relations.
The question now is how far Washington is willing to reach to bring Pyongyang back to the table and whether Seoul is able to seize the opportunity. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
As our Kim Do-yeon just reported, President Trump appears to be stepping up his overtures to Kim Jong-un, with Seoul and Washington cutting their annual joint military drill short by nearly a week. Our defense correspondent Park Gun reports.
The annual ROK-U Freedom Shield exercise, one of the two major ROK-U.S. joint military exercises, has officially been cut roughly in half. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said Wednesday that this year's exercise will now end this Friday, instead of the originally scheduled August 27th at Washington's request.
We are making some adjustments to the duration and scale of the exercise. We'll continue discussions on various measures to achieve the objectives of the exercise and maintain a strong combined defense posture.
The U.S. Department of War also confirmed the adjustments, saying the changes preserve essential readiness and training objectives, with no degradation to U.S. training objectives. Under the revised plan, the command post exercise, which uses war game simulations, will now end after the defensively focused first phase. The second phase, which targets counteroffensive operations, will be cut entirely. An additional 14 combined field training exercises scheduled during UFS will also be scaled back. The decision comes just 2 days after U.S. President Donald Trump asked Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to scale back the exercise, citing his very good relationship with the North Korean leader and criticizing Seoul for what he described as a lack of support with the ongoing Iranian conflict. On Wednesday, Foreign Minister Cho said that a message to scale back exercises had not been conveyed to officials in either country, and that he doesn't view the move as a unilateral decision by the U.S. He also added that Defense Minister An Gyubek has been in close contact with Washington since Trump's remarks. The comments come amid speculation that U.S. Forces Korea Commander General Xavier Brunson's visit to South Korea's defense ministry on Tuesday may have been related to discussions over the exercise. Questions have also emerged over whether the shortened exercise could affect the Allies' efforts to transfer wartime operational control. Cho dismissed such concerns, saying that since the reduction came at Washington's request, he doesn't expect it to be used as grounds for delaying the transfer. Defense Minister An also said Wednesday the adjustment would not affect the joint assessment required for the OPCON transfer, as that process takes place during the first phase of UFS, which remains unchanged. Park Geon-woo, Arirang News.
And Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in Seoul for talks with Foreign Minister Jo Hyun with North Korea, and efforts to improve strained bilateral ties expected to dominate the discussions. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young is at the Foreign Ministry, where the Chinese diplomat arrived earlier this morning. Soo-young, what is the latest?
Good evening, Pami. Foreign Minister Jo Hyun and his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi have convened here at the Foreign Ministry in Seoul and are believed to have had a dinner following their meeting. Now, it's Wang Yi's first time to see Foreign Minister Jo Hyun in 11 months, following their previous meeting in Beijing last September. And it also marks the first time in five years that the Chinese diplomat visits Seoul. And now we are just hearing that the Chinese diplomat has left the building, and as he walked out, he responded to some reporters' questions, emphasizing the importance of restoring Korea and China's ties, and saying that since the Lee Jae-myung administration took office, improvement has been made in those bilateral relations. But first of all, before we get a fuller picture of what the two diplomats had to say, let's take a listen to what they said to each other as they began their meeting.
We've been working closely to implement the full restoration of Korea-China relations in ways that bring tangible benefits to people in both countries. Today's meeting is an opportunity to review the progress made so far.
As the minister said, we will mark the 34th anniversary of diplomatic ties in a few days. China will work with Korea, remain true to our original aspirations, and move with the times to take the strategic cooperative partnership to a new level and chart a new vision for the relationship.
The Foreign Ministry has said that the two diplomats would be discussing bilateral ties to the Korean Peninsula, among other regional and global issues. But at this point, it's still unclear what they really had to say and what kind of agenda was on the table. So we might have to wait a little longer for a readout.
Right, Soo-young, this is the first day of Wang Yi's two-day visit to Seoul. Now, what are we expecting or watching for these talks, and also the upcoming day tomorrow?
Well, the biggest media attention has very much been on the topic of North Korea, whether China can help create an opening for dialogue with the regime. And of course, the timing couldn't be better because, as you remember, President Lee Jae-myung last Saturday mentioned the need for a peace regime aimed at instilling a peaceful state of being on the peninsula to replace the 1953 armistice that halted the Korean War but never formally ended it. And US President Donald Trump, he's ordered the allies to substantially scale back their joint military exercises, while reportedly pushing for another meeting with Kim Jong-un as early as this autumn. Now, Seoul has long wanted Beijing to play a role and use its leverage over Pyongyang, but experts have said that China currently has very little reason to do so.
In wanting to maintain some form of trilateral alignment among North Korea, China, and Russia, this is not necessarily disadvantageous for China in building a front against the U.S. Thus, China has no reason to step in directly and try to persuade North Korea.
And as he left just moments ago, Foreign Minister Wang Yi did say that the US needs to change its hostile policy towards North Korea when he was answering reporters' questions. Now, that leads to another point that we'll be looking at, how the two sides described North Korea's nuclear program. When Cho Han-wang met in Beijing last September, discussion of North Korea's denuclearization was omitted from China's account of the meeting, while Seoul clearly raised the issue. So once we get the readouts, we'll be comparing not only what the two sides said, but very much what was left unsaid. And there then is the fundamental question of whether we're going to see tangible moves to improve Korea-China relations, as Seoul very much remains a staunch US treaty ally. Over the past decade, clear fault lines have emerged amid deepening US-China competition over semiconductors and artificial intelligence, supply chains, and also the issue of Taiwan. Still, Seoul and Beijing have at least voiced their desire to reset ties since the leaders met at last year's APEC summit in Korea, followed by President Lee's state visit to Beijing in January. Now, Seoul has said that the foreign ministers' talks tonight would assess the progress made in that regard in restoring bilateral ties ahead of this year's APEC in China's Shenzhen in November. And with Chinese President Xi Jinping expected to visit Washington, D.C. next month, Seoul might be hoping for some improvements in regional dynamics, at the very least some traction on engaging North Korea. But first, of course, we have to see what comes out of tonight's talks and, of course, Wang's meetings with President Lee and National Security Advisor Wi Song-lag on Thursday. Back to you, Tammy.
Alrighty, thank you, Suyang, for keeping us updated. And in other news, Hanwha Aerospace has been chosen as the provider of K9 mobile howitzers for the U.S. Army. The company signed an agreement with the U.S. Army on Tuesday, marking a milestone for the K defense industry. Our Hong Seo-jung tells us more.
Hanwha Defense USA, a subsidiary of Hanwha Aerospace, has entered the U.S. defense market for the first time after signing a deal with the U.S. Army on Tuesday. As the sole supplier under the deal, the company will provide K9 wheeled self-propelled howitzer prototypes for the U.S. Army's Mobile Tactical Cannon program. The deal has a cumulative value of $262.9 million, with the option to include 12 more systems on top of the original 6 prototypes. According to the U.S. Army, the system is expected to replace M777 towed artillery in select units once it passes soldier testing and is fit to field. While the exact procurement number has yet to be confirmed, industry estimates suggest that the potential production requirement could reach around 500 systems worth nearly $7.15 billion. Hanwha Aerospace won the deal for the U.S. Army's artillery modernization amid intense competition from U.S. defense firm Anduril Industries, Germany's Rheinmetall, and Britain's BAE Systems, among others. Before the system moves into full-scale fielding, its performance will be evaluated based on its effectiveness, reliability, and supportability under realistic combat conditions. The significance of the contract lies in the successful partnership between the government and the private sector. Hanwha said government support and swift negotiations continued throughout the entire process, all the way until it secured the contract. The contract marks the fruition of a two-generation effort by Hanwha Group Chairman Kim Seung-yeon and his eldest son, Executive Vice Chairman Kim Dong-kwan. Hanwha Aerospace's push to enter the U.S. defense market dates back to 2017, when the company participated in the Association of the United States Army's annual conference in Washington, D.C. After identifying the U.S. Army's mobile tactical cannon business in its 2024 budget plan, the company began developing the K9MH that same year. Hanwha Aerospace is accelerating its localization efforts by signing a 3-year lease for manufacturing facilities in Alabama, strengthening its presence in the local supply chain and paving the way to become a long-term partner in the U.S. Army's artillery modernization efforts. Hong Seo-jung, Arirang News.
The South Korean won has strengthened against the U.S. dollar, returning to the 1,301 level. Now, expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve will hold interest rates steady, along with a steady dollar selling by exporter firms, drove the sharp gain. Our Baek Ju-hee has this report.
On Wednesday, the Korean won dipped below the 1,401 mark against the U.S. dollar. This is the lowest level and the won's strongest point since September 24th of last year, when it hit 1,397.51. after climbing past the 1,500 won mark earlier this year to peak at over 1,545 won in late June. The exchange rate has reversed course on Wednesday, tumbling back down to 1,397.7 won. The main driver behind the won's strength is fading expectations of a Fed rate hike in September. Recent U.S. economic indicators, including retail sales, the consumer price index, and the producer price index, all missed market expectations, easing inflation fears. Local supply and demand conditions also played a key role. Local exporters, especially major chip makers, have shifted strategies from selling U.S. dollars at month end to offloading them on a continuous basis. In addition, dollar inflows from major events such as SK Hynix's $26.5 billion ADR issuance and corporate tax payments have boosted foreign currency liquidity in the market. However, market experts point out that these downward pressures on the exchange rate may only be temporary.
Considering interest rate differentials and the expansion of overall money supply over a 2 to 3 year period, the proper exchange rate should be higher. Key fundamentals like interest rate gaps and inflation matter, but factors such as Korean company investments in the U.S. and major corporate ADR issuances are temporary drivers.
Analysts expect the exchange rate to remain in the upper 1,300 to low 1,400 won range through the end of the year, supported by solid economic fundamentals and potential foreign exchange market interventions by U.S. and Japanese authorities. However, escalating tensions in the Middle East remained a major risk factor, as prolonged conflict could drive demand back toward the U.S. dollar as a safe asset. 백주희, Arirang News.
Korea's economy is expected to sustain solid growth momentum throughout this year and the next, as the country's economic growth forecasts have risen from previous estimates. Lee Ju-yeon reports.
Korea's state-run think tank, the Korea Development Institute, has upgraded the country's GDP growth outlook for the rest of this year and next year. According to a report released by the KDI on Wednesday, it raised Korea's GDP growth forecast for this year to 3.2%, up 0.7 percentage points from the previous estimate in May. The institute also upgraded next year's growth outlook by 0.5 percentage points compared to its previous estimate. A KDI official explained that the upward revision was driven by expectations that the current semiconductor rally will persist. Exports and facility investments have shown strong momentum so far this year, and this positive trend is expected to continue on the back of sustained global AI investments. The growth outlook for goods exports this year was upgraded to 8.7% this year, higher than its May forecast. Likewise, the growth outlook for facility investments was also raised to 7.9% this year, led by global AI infrastructure expansion. In light of these economic developments, the current account balance is projected to record an unprecedentedly large surplus. Driven by surging semiconductor prices, the KDI expects a current account surplus of around $360 billion for both this year and the next. However, because Korea's economy relies heavily on global chip demand, experts warn that future fluctuations in the semiconductor market could trigger greater volatility.
The problem is that semiconductors account for 39% of our total exports, and exports represent 41% of our GDP. If the growth in semiconductor exports slows down, then the growth rate of our total exports could also slow down, ultimately lowering our economic growth rate.
Because Korea's growth has been heavily concentrated in the semiconductor sector, which has a low employment inducement effect, the KDI report also highlighted that the high growth rate has not translated into a clear improvement in the labor market. Therefore, despite the strong overall outlook, the report projects household-level economic indicators such as private consumption and employment to show only modest gains. Lee Ju-yeon, Arirang News.
And Korea is laying out its roadmap for future economic growth, aiming to position itself as a major global financial and artificial intelligence hub. To discuss these goals, Deputy Prime Minister Koo sat down with the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Korea. Park Jun-an reports.
Korea's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economy Koo says now is the time for the world to pay attention to the Korean economy, especially as the AI era unfolds.
Korea has strong capabilities across the entire AI ecosystem, from infrastructure and chips to world-class manufacturing, industry know-how, and a wealth of real-world data. The U.S. is also Korea's most important partner in AI. By combining the ideas of American companies and their business experience with Korea's capabilities and commercializing them here before taking them to global markets, I believe we can make the global economy more efficient.
This comment came when Koo attended a special luncheon hosted by the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea, where Koo and AMCHAM Chairman James Kim discussed Korea's vision for long-term growth. Wednesday's discussion focused on strengthening Korea's position as a global financial hub, implementing bilateral strategic investments, and expanding AI cooperation. During his remarks, Koo outlined the government's 3-4-5 vision, where Korea aims to reach a 3% potential growth rate, position itself as one of the world's top 4 exporters, and achieve a per capita income of $50,000. He also highlighted capital market advancement tools, such as easing foreign exchange regulations and transitioning to 24-hour foreign exchange market operations. AmCham CEO James Kim welcomed the government's commitment. He noted that the strong AI momentum from tech giants like Samsung Electronics and SK hynix gives Korea a unique opportunity to solidify its position as a major investment hub and expand bilateral ties.
So as we commemorate the 250th anniversary of America's founding this year, there is no better time now to look ahead to the next chapter of the U.S.-Korea partnership. One defined not only by our security alliance, but increasingly by investment, innovation, technology, and public-private collaboration.
Minister Koo also noted he prefers calling AmCham member companies CoreCham, emphasizing that American companies operating and investing here should be treated equally as Korean firms. He added that the government deeply appreciates their contributions and will do its best to maintain close communication and cooperation. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
In other news, Iran's armed forces chief has warned Gulf neighbors not to help the United States. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump says that no talks are happening with Iran. Kim So-young has the latest.
Iran's armed forces have issued a warning to Gulf countries against assisting the U.S. military. Chief of Staff Ali Abdullah says any Gulf state that lets Washington use its territory or even quietly refuels U.S. aircraft will not escape their notice, saying nothing is hidden from their eyes. His posts on X were direct. Assistance to what he called an aggressive U.S. military effort will be treated as taking part in it. The Financial Times says this is a clear signal that this conflict could widen beyond Iran's own borders, and reports suggest Tehran has even weighed hitting American assets in Europe if the war escalates further. On the diplomatic front, there's no movement at all. President Trump posted Monday that there are no talks or conversations going on or scheduled with Iran, reaffirming that the U.S. naval blockade on Iran remains fully in place, even sharing a map marking the Strait of Hormuz as, in his word, new U.S. territory. Tehran isn't backing down either. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf laid out Tehran's own conditions for reopening the strait.
And let me make it clear, until America implements its commitments under the Memorandum of Understanding, including lifting the blockade on the release of frozen assets, lifting the oil sanctions, ending threats and military operations on all fronts, and other conditions that America has agreed to under the understanding, the strait will not be reopened.
With neither side blinking, some in the American press say the fallout is landing in an unexpected place. Axios reported that South Korea has become what the outlet calls a surprising target of Trump's frustration after the president ordered a scale back of joint U.S.-Korea military exercise. Kim So-young, Arirang News.
The weather has turned hot and muggy again. With the heat making a comeback, heatwave advisories have now been expanded to many parts of the country. Tropical night advisories are also in effect for parts of the southern regions. So make sure to stay hydrated and find ways to keep cool throughout the day and night. As daytime temperatures climb, the atmosphere is becoming increasingly unstable. Tomorrow, showers will move through southern Gyeonggi-do, Chungcheong-do provinces, and the southern part of the country. In terms of how much rain, 5 to 60 millimeters are expected. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 24 degrees Celsius, Daejeon 23 and Busan 25 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju will all soar to 33 degrees. Rain is on the way for the central areas from Friday evening into Saturday morning. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.